I'm Ann Petrick, Vice President of Research for Vistage. I'm happy to host the latest webinar in our Peak Performer webinar series, which is designed to support your leadership climb by bringing the most trusted experts to the Vistage community. Those experts who provide exceptional insight and best practices to help you navigate challenges and possibilities. As business leaders, your focus is on managing growth and scaling your companies while also managing profitability. But there is another all too important component to leading a legacy, and that is preserving wealth. To help you understand steps to take in the short term and long term, today we've invited Hillel Presser to talk more in depth about how to secure your wealth, and we'll have a unique opportunity to ask him a lot of questions. So if you have any questions, think about them now, and as was shared, please submit them in the chat. Hillel represents individuals and businesses in connection with the establishment of comprehensive asset protection plans that incorporate both domestic and international components. Hillel is a longtime Vistage member and speaker, so if this is a topic important to you and your Vistage group, he is available to bring his expertise to you. So this, as I said, will be very interactive. We'll have time for questions. So sit back while Hillel gets us started and get your brains going. And then after he shares some information, we'll have a robust Q&A following his presentation. So thank you for being here today, Hillel. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and happy Friday. Excited to get going. I'm going to limit my presenting time today, maybe just to about 10 or 15 minutes tops, only because I want to leave as much time as possible for any Q&A. I always joke, there's not many times you get to ask a lawyer a question and not get a bill, but today will be one of those times. Today it's free, tomorrow it's not, so please make sure any questions you have, ask away. Just to give you a little bit overview on today's short presentation before we go to the Q&A, I always just want to start by giving a little bit of background information about asset protection. And I'm also going to go over some of the common misconceptions about asset protection, and then we'll get right into the Q&A. So probably the first question I always get asked when I go to speak is why I became an asset protection attorney. And if you would have asked me when I was 10 years old what I was going to be, I would have told you hands down that I was going to be an attorney. And it probably has something to do with the fact that at that point, I was very close with my uncle. And while I knew him as Uncle Jimmy, the rest of the world knew him as Jim the Hammer Shapiro. And Jimmy used to get on TV and scream at the top of his lungs, I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro. I'll wring out every penny, squeeze out every dime. You don't have to like me, just make sure you call me. I may be an SOB, but I'm your SOB. And he does it much better than me, so I'm going to show you one of Jim's many ads.
I cannot rip out the hearts of those who hurt you. I cannot hand you their severed heads, but I can hunt them down and settle the score. I'll squeeze them for every dime I can. Every single dime. I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro. But I cannot proceed until you call. 1-800-546-7777. You call, I hammer.
Now, because we're trying to save time today, I won't show you my favorite ad where his face actually pops out of the zero of the 1-800 number, but I think you get the point. And the interesting thing to understand is that these ads were from 30, 40 years ago in upstate New York. Today, this is the norm. Every bus bench, who can I sue? Every radio ad, who can I sue? Every TV ad, who can I sue? How do we take the money out of the hardworking business owners like yourself and redistribute the wealth? So while there's thousands of attorneys in every city trying to find a way to take your money, I thought it would be pretty neat to be one of only a few in the entire country that teach you how to protect it. So I joke and I say I am the lawyer that hates lawyers. So what is asset protection? Asset protection is the legal process of titling both your personal and business assets to put them beyond the reach of future potential threats and creditors. And what we do as asset protection attorneys is we want to make it so difficult, so expensive, if not impossible, for anybody to collect against you that they don't want to sue you in the first place. We don't want you to be the low-hanging fruit. And a lot of people say, well, what if I already have an asset protection plan? And if you do, that's fantastic. But every year the laws changes. Every year your assets change. And just like you go for an annual physical, you also want to make sure that you do a financial physical. And probably one of the biggest misconceptions, and I wanted to talk about it separately before we got to the misconception slide because it's that big, is every single day somebody will come into my office and they have a trust. It happened yesterday. Client comes in with a trust and they think they're protected. A revocable living trust will not protect you. It gives you 0% asset protection. All of your assets inside of the revocable living trust are 100% unprotected. So a trust is a great estate planning tool, but does absolutely nothing for asset protection. So why do you even need asset protection? I showed this cartoon. It's two lawyers talking. One says, I say sue. The other one says, anyone in particular. And I always get smiles when I show this, but this is the reality. Just like we're smart enough to get together as Vistage members and learn from each other, the lawyers are getting together and they're saying, who's our next target? There's 100 million lawsuits in every single year, and that number's only growing. Lawsuits have literally become the next biggest business. There's a 1 in 4 chance you will be sued in the next 12 months. The average person in business is sued 5 times over their lifetime, and there's a 50% chance of divorce. A lawsuit can cost you tons of money, even if you win the case. And probably one of the most crazy stats that I've heard recently, and it's incredible, is we get up every morning and we know that we can be in an accident, a car accident, but you're actually, excuse me, you're actually 7 times more likely to face a lawsuit than get into a car accident. And to me, that's just crazy. So the trick is not making money, it's keeping it. And the challenge I give is for every 60 minutes you spend making money, stop, spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it. You don't want to have to start all over, take your chips off the table, make yourself as lawsuit and judgment proof as possible. So some of the biggest misconceptions, number one, asset protection is for the ultra wealthy. That's not true. You know, I've represented 30 or 40 NFL and NBA professional athletes. And if you take a football player who signs a $50 million contract, well, if he gets sued for $5 million, he's not happy, but he still has $45 million left. Take a school teacher who may have saved up a few $100,000 over their career. If they get sued for $1 million, they're wiped out. Number two, asset protection is too costly to set up. Wrong. There's things you can do that are free that protect you, depending on the state that you live in. There's things you can do at a very minimal cost that'll protect you. So I always tell clients, don't try and do everything at once. You know, crawl before you walk before you run, and run before you sprint. A lot of people think asset protection is only in case of a litigation, and that's not true. Asset protection is for any reason. We all work hard. We're all so focused on growth, growth, growth. How do we make the money? How do we build our lemonade stand? The problem is we could be building our lemonade stand for 15 years, and then one thing happens. It doesn't even need to be something we did. Maybe it's one of our kids are driving our cars and they get in a car accident, or our employees do something. Next, people think that asset protection is all about hiding. It's not. Asset protection is not about hiding. It's not about secrecy. It's about protection. In fact, I tell every client that presume you're going to have to disclose what you have, because if you lose your case, they'll ask you under oath what you have, or they'll have you fill out a financial affidavit, and you can't lie. Otherwise, you'll be in contempt of court. You know, the cover-up's worse than the crime. Some people think asset protection says I have something to hide. Wrong. Like everything, you want to do things legally and ethically. There's nothing wrong with having a gun for self-defense or going to the shooting range. Obviously, you can't rob a 7-Eleven. Anytime you do asset protection, you just want to make sure that you're always doing things legally and ethically. And lastly, and I'll have a whole slide on this because it's so important, asset protection is only necessary if you don't have insurance. And that's wrong as well. I tell my clients, buy as much insurance as you can because it's cheap and it helps you sleep at night. But understand that insurance companies are for-profit companies. In fact, they're one of the most profitable industries in the entire world. I always joke that when I come back, I want to come back as an insurance company. The majority of lawsuits are not covered by insurance. Anybody who ever's read their policy knows there's about a page of what's covered and 40 pages of exclusions. My dad used to tell me growing up, he'd say, son, the big print giveth, the small print taketh away. Your coverage may be inadequate. Maybe you have $500,000 in coverage, but if you get sued for $1 million, you need to come out of pocket. Your insurance company might go bankrupt. If I would have said this 5 or 10 years ago, you'd kick me out of here. Today, we have banks and Fortune 500 companies going out of business. Who's to say the insurance companies won't be next? And there's so many things that insurance doesn't cover: divorce, other uninsured financial risks. So the point is that insurance alone is not the answer. You want your own asset protection plan to supplement your insurance. Now, I don't want to take the time today. I want to give you the time today. I want you to be able to ask me anything at all that you want. And understand, when we're done, if you'd like us to send you complimentary copies of our books, just email me. I'm happy to do it. If you'd like a complimentary consultation, just email me. I'm happy to do it. I know some people like to talk in private, but literally for the rest of this program, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I want you to ask me anything and everything that you have in mind regarding asset protection. Please, if you have it in your mind, ask it, because if you have it, there's a good chance, we have a lot of people on here today, there's a good chance someone else will have it. So I'm going to turn it over now, Anne, to you, and let's let the people ask away.
All right, great. Well, as the questions are coming in, we had some that we received in advance, so we'll start with those. So everyone, please, there's plenty of time to submit questions. The first one I have is we recently did a webinar, a conversation with Matt Garrett, who's also a Vistage speaker like yourself, and he talked about the estate and gifting levels and how those are changing, and that creates some actions you might want to take in the short term in terms of gifting things to a trust, especially in a family business situation. So could you talk about some of those gifting levels and what that might mean?
Absolutely. And just to preface, I'm going to round today just so to make it easy. But essentially, as of today, everyone's allowed to gift about, again, I'm rounding, $13 million per person away tax-free. That means if you're married, you're allowed to give $13 million away, and your spouse is allowed to give $13 million away, for a total of $26 million. It's actually a little bit less than 13. Next year it goes up a little bit, but let's just use the number 13. So what does that mean? That means if you're a single person and you're worth $5 million, if you pass away today, you don't need to worry. However, if you're a single person and you're worth $20 million, the first $13 million will pass to whoever you want it to. The additional $7 million will be taxed probably at about a 40 to 50% tax rate. So those are the laws as of today. It's about $13 million per person. After the $13 million, you pay tax, which is roughly about 40 or 50% in estate tax. Now, with that said, it's going to sunset a few years from now. And again, I'm rounding. It's going to go down from about 13 million a person down to about 5 million a person. Or if you double it for a married couple, 10 million per couple. That means if you're a single person with $3 million, you have nothing to worry about. If you're a single person with $8 million, the first $5 million is tax-free. The next $3 million, you're going to pay that estate tax of 40 to 50%. So first of all, I just wanted to give you the foundation. So what can you do? If you're someone who either has above 13 million or 5 million, and understand we shouldn't just use these two numbers because they could change to any number up or down at any point. Anybody who tells you they know what it'll be is either lying or doesn't know what they're doing. So I always tell my clients, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. What if you have 3 million, but the number goes down to 500,000? You don't want to pay taxes on the 2.5 million. So what can you do? What's the solution? What you can do is you can gift assets outside of your taxable estate. And some people say, well, that all sounds well and great. However, I don't want to lose control. Well, there's ways to do gifting where you don't lose control. And I could spend the whole hour on this. I'm only going to take a few more minutes. But if you're a married couple, maybe you have $10 million. The husband can gift $5 million to the wife. The wife can gift $5 million to the husband. Now, together, you still have access to the full 10 million, but you've solved your tax issue because it's now outside of your taxable estate. Well, maybe you're not married and you want to give it to your kids, but you don't want to have to go to your kids asking for money for McDonald's since you've given them all your money. There's structures you can create. One example is a limited partnership. And what you could do is you can gift non-voting shares to your kids. So what that means is you're getting the assets out of your estate. However, you still remain in control. So that way you can decide what real estate you buy and sell, what stocks and bonds you invest in, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, well, I think this is a related question, but what are the benefits and the pitfalls of establishing a family trust?
Sure. So when you say a family trust, first understand there's two different types of trusts. There's a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. So let's talk about both. A revocable trust will not give you any asset protection, will not give you any tax help. However, it's great for estate planning. So when you pass away, all of your assets will be outside of probate. So what does that mean? If you don't have a trust and you die, whatever you die with is public record. It takes a long time to get where you want it to go, and the attorneys make a lot of money off you. If instead you put together a revocable living trust, now you avoid probate. Now your assets go where you want them to go much quicker. There's much less attorney's fees, and everything's private. So that's the revocable trust. Really nothing bad from a revocable trust that can happen. The other type of trust, which this person may be describing as a family trust, is an irrevocable trust. And the benefits of an irrevocable trust is you're irrevocably giving the asset away, which means if you get sued, it's totally protected. So it's great for asset protection. You're also irrevocably giving the asset away. So it's now out of your estate. So if it's a $5 million building that grows to 10 million, that $10 million building, when you die, there's no estate taxes. So with irrevocable trust, there's really great asset protection. There's really great tax. Of course, you can integrate all the estate planning clauses into there as well. But what's the negative? The negative is it's irrevocable. So once you give it away, you give it away. I'll never forget, I had a couple come into my office and they said, look, we gave everything to our kids. We asked our kids for a loan and they told us to screw off. So, it sounds crazy, but unfortunately it happened. So if you're doing something irrevocably, just understand you're giving up ownership, you're giving up control. So you better make sure that you have enough to live on without that, or you better make sure that whoever's in control of that, whether it's a spouse or a kid, et cetera, you trust them to help you if needed.
Okay, so irrevocable trusts do provide asset protection, but there's some inherent risks to that. All right, how do some of these choices that you make about your assets and protecting your wealth relate to philanthropic activity and giving some of your wealth, and whether that's in a trust or just as using gifting? Do you have any recommendations around that?
Sure. So first, just understand that there's no, one size fits all. Whether we're talking asset protection planning, estate planning, tax planning, charitable planning, business succession planning, first of all, everything's integrated. You can't do one without looking at the others. And nothing's cookie cutter. Everything needs to be individualized and customized and tailored to you. But in general, you can absolutely do gifting to charities where it's great because number one, it could be that you're really helping this charity in need. However, number two, you can obviously, of course, also get a very, very good tax break. So depending on what your goal is and what you want to achieve, and it's not just one goal, right? Like in that example, you're helping a charity, but you're also getting a tax break. There's things you can do, but you can absolutely use these trusts in charitable giving, which will also potentially give you some tax savings as well.
Okay, well, that is a great segue to the next question about taxes. Someone asked, what are the best strategies for minimizing taxes, specifically for the sale of a business?
Sure. So when you're talking about the sale of a business, and again, there's no one size fits all. I don't want to be the doctor that gives you all the medicine without knowing every symptom, but just to speak very generally, one thing you can do, and again, it depends on the sale of the business and the cost, but you may want to get the ownership of the business outside of your taxable estate. So I'll give you an example. You have a business, and most people start a business from scratch, so their cost basis is zero. Okay. Well, if you then sell a business for $100 million, there's a lot of taxes. Then not only are you paying taxes, but when you die, you now have $100 million in your account. We talked about earlier how depending when you die, you might have 13 million you can use, you might have 5 million you could use. We don't know what that number is, but the 95 million or the 87 million is now taxable. So a really good strategy is to get the business out of your name before you sell it. So if you own shares in an S Corp or a C Corp or an LLC, maybe you take those shares, get them outside of your name. That way they're protected. They're good for estate planning. There's a lot of tax planning. And again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It may be that you retain 20% ownership of the business, but 80% goes into one of these special trusts. So a lot of different things you can do to mitigate taxes.
Okay, and is that, I assume that's included as one of the things to do to prep for exiting a business in the next 2 to 3 years? Are there other things that people should consider?
I mean, there's so much to do. We actually have a strategic partner that does nothing but sells businesses. Their company's called Business Exit Advisors, and they have all sorts of things that they do. I don't want to pretend to be an expert. Of course, I'm happy to put anybody in touch with them if they've liked, but they help prepare the businesses for sale. They help maximize the profit when they sell. They help with a seamless transition for the previous owner, the new owner, and the employees. They help businesses franchise. Of course, we always help protect the proceeds. It's interesting. One of the biggest lawsuits we ever see is when someone sells their business. And people always find this so surprising because they're like, wait a minute, now is when I have no liability. And it's actually the opposite. And if you think about it, it makes sense. So, think about it. No one's ever going to run that business like you. Okay. When you sell the business and the new owner runs it, a lot of times income goes down, expenses go up, and then they turn around a year or two later and sue for fraud. I call it renegotiation. So anytime I have a client that's going to sell their business, I always tell them immediately, set up a really good asset protection plan. That way the proceeds from the sale can go there and be protected. And if the new owner tries to renegotiate a few years later, your chips are off the table.
Yeah, is there a general vehicle recommended for asset protection, or it sounds like this is a very layered approach that's contingent on your business?
Definitely layered. In some people's states, their homes are protected. Buy an expensive home, pay off your mortgage. In other people's states, they're not. In some people's states, retirement accounts, life insurance, annuities are protected. In other states, they're not. And then we use tons of different types of business entities. So we use LLCs, we use limited partnerships, we use trusts, we use domestic entities, we use entities internationally outside of the United States. So depending on what someone's assets are, what they're trying to protect against, et cetera, it's going to be a customized fit for them.
Okay, well, that's a good segue into talking about structure. We have a question. If we hold assets in a single member LLC, does that protect us from personal liability? So for example, if I have money in an account and real estate owned in the LLC, is it protected from judgment against me personally?
Okay. So you brought up a lot of different questions here. It's really interesting. The short answer is no. Okay. In June 2010, there was a Florida Supreme Court case called Olmstead. It was followed by a case called Barber. And what that case stated is that if you have a single member LLC, 100%, there's no protection. So in this example, if someone has a single member LLC, they own 100%, and that LLC owns a piece of real estate in cash, if they get sued personally, they can lose the LLC, which means they can lose the real estate and the cash. But I want to take it one step further. You got to be very careful about keeping real estate and cash together in the same LLC. You want to segregate your risks, you want to separate your winners from your losers, and you want to keep your eggs in different baskets. Think about it. If you have $400,000 of cash in an LLC and you have a rental property in an LLC, if somebody gets injured on the rental property, they sue the LLC and they take your $400,000 in cash. So you want to also make sure that you segregate those two assets.
Okay, sounds very complex. So when you mentioned states and how things might vary by states, we have a question about if there's any key reasons to form a management company in Delaware or Wyoming to manage your operating LLC that might be in Texas or California, for example.
Sure. I mean, well, first of all, the first question is, do you need a management company? So, don't let the tail wag the dog. Okay. If you need a management company, then yes, the answer is we may want to do what's called jurisdiction shopping. I like Delaware a lot. So yeah, forming a management company in Delaware sounds realistic. I think the things you need to be careful of is what is that management company doing? And here's why. If that management company is truly doing things in a different state, like let's say it's doing a lot of business activity in California, well, then technically, even though you created it in Delaware, you should register it as a foreign corporation or LLC in California. Well, if you register it in California, now you're subject to California laws. Now you're paying California fees. So when you look at it, now you're paying Delaware fees and California fees, and you're getting California law, not Delaware law. So do I love Delaware for like a management company? The answer is yes, but you got to make sure all the other facts are in line.
Interesting. Another layer of complexity. So getting into, I know you've heard a lot of stories or done some creative things. We had a question, what are some less conventional strategies recommended to protect assets and investments?
Sure. One that maybe we don't use as often because it's much more difficult and could be expensive if done correctly is equity stripping. So what I mean by that is everyone knows about putting assets in entities and different layers and firewalls and different state exemptions. Like in Florida, your house is protected. But my question to people is, what's $100,000 Mercedes worth if you owe 95,000? What's $1 million home worth if you owe 950,000? So there's strategies and techniques and tactics that essentially what you can do is you can create legal and enforceable liens and mortgages and encumbrances. And that way, if you ever get sued, there's liens and mortgages and encumbrances, friendly ones, in front of the real liability. So I'd say equity stripping probably fits that boat.
Okay, interesting. I was just reading about that. Okay, a couple questions, more questions. Keep the questions coming. What can I do if I have significant wealth in my company's stock but need immediate liquidity?
So, if you're cash poor but business rich, you got to figure out how can you create cash. So obviously, there's a lot of different things you can do. One thing is you could sell a small portion of your company. Now, people always say, obviously, and I'm not here to give financial advice, that equity is the most expensive thing you can give away. So while that may create cash, it's also going to lose you equity. It's kind of like short-term gain for long-term loss, but you certainly could sell stock. Another thing you could do is pledge stock and use it as collateral. So there'll be people that'll be willing to give you loans. Maybe someone will give you $1 million loan and maybe they give you a 6% interest rate. I'm just making up the facts. However, they may securitize either the stock in your company or maybe it's a business asset like intellectual property, accounts receivables, machinery, equipment, and securitize the loan against that. But I think that's two ways that you could probably get some cash pretty quickly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And last question we have, well, not the last question, but the last question we have from our participants, and I have a few more. What should I consider when planning for healthcare expenses as I age?
Really good question. So, a lot of different factors there. Number one, you should definitely speak to a really good insurance agent who deals with long-term care, because I think long-term care insurance is really good for that. And if you don't know someone, I'm happy to introduce you. We don't do it, but obviously we deal with people. Also, there's different types of special Medicare and or Medicaid planning. There's look backs from memory. I think it's about 5 years where you can get the assets outside of your name. That is what I'd call almost like a subspecialty within estate planning. So if you're going to do that, just make sure you go to someone who specializes in that, who does nothing but that all day, every day. It's not something we do, but obviously we're very familiar with it.
Okay, great. And I wanted to ask about if we talk about structure and LLCs, but if someone's considering doing an employee stock option program, are there any asset protection considerations for that?
Yeah, so again, it's going to depend, first of all, how is the regular company structured? Is it an S corp or a C corp? And I say that because let's say I own 100% of a S corp. I'm just making it up.
Okay.
And I, and I say, you know what, I'm going to give you a 20% stock option. Well, if you take ownership to that 20%, forget all the business factors, like now you can see the books and records, forget all that. If you get sued personally, maybe you go through a divorce, maybe you get sued for a car accident or a slip or fall or a breach of contract. Your 20% of the company is now at risk. And I, the 80% owner, can end up with a different partner. So you have to look at how the original company is structured, but you always want to make sure, especially with partners, that the ownership in the business is protected. So that way your ownership is protected and the employee's ownership is protected, because you don't want either one to end up with a new partner.
Okay, thank you. Many of our members are really looking at acquisitions, and we see every year that part of growth is that inorganic growth from new acquisitions, and certainly with the economy the way it is, there's some opportunities. Are there any financial implications in terms of structure, things like that, that members should consider when they're looking at acquiring a new company?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was also just emailed a question as well, which I'll answer next. But the answer is absolutely. Most of the time, you want to do an asset purchase agreement. So, I see people all the time that buy stock, and you need to be very, very careful. When you do an asset purchase agreement, you purchase just the assets. You get to start fresh. But when you purchase the stock, like shares in an S Corp, a C Corp, or an LLC, you're getting the assets, you're also getting the liabilities, and there's probably many liabilities that you don't even know exist. So 95, 98% of the time, I want my clients to do an asset purchase agreement. We'll create the correct asset protection entities to buy the assets. I don't want any risk at all. Now, with that being said, there's some times where there may be a business where you can't do that. Maybe it's a strip club. I hate to use the example. Maybe it's a liquor license, right? But maybe it's an adult bookstore. But there's these businesses that the license goes with the business, and you can't sell the asset. So in that way, you can't do an asset purchase agreement. You have to do a stock agreement, and with that way, there's also different ways to protect you as well. So I don't want to be the one buying the stock, because then I could be liable. Maybe we create a company to buy the stock. So you have to understand what you're purchasing and can the assets be transferred, and then make sure that you do it correctly. I was just emailed a question, so I'll just answer it. It says, and forgive me, I'm reading it as I go. If your stock is in your name and you die, is your stock taxable to your wife? The answer is no. Husband and wife, there's no tax in between the husband and wife. There's tax in between the parents and the children, but not the spouses.
Okay, interesting. My father passed away recently, and my mother received a tax bill for some of his assets. I guess that was just from his cash. So I don't know what that
Yeah,
or is that state specific?
No, I'd have to look at it, but again, if the husband dies and wife gets the assets, there should be no tax issues. There's probably more to the story here, and
Okay.
I'm happy.
Yep.
Again, I'm happy to look at it for you and take a look, but it sounds a little odd, so there must be something we don't know. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, any other questions from our participants? Well, I want to know, Hilla, what's the top thing that when you start working with someone, the most common thing you do? Is it changing structure? Is it establishing a trust? What are like the table stakes, the most common thing that you help companies with?
Sure. So first off, number one is education. So the client needs to know that there are things they can do, whether they want to do them or not, whether they want to do all of them or not, that's a different story, but at least be educated to know that there's things they can do. That's number one. Uh, Number two is inventory their wealth. Everybody has so much more than they think they do. People think about money, they think about real estate, they think about their business, but what about if you have an inheritance coming? What about if you have, somebody who owes you money? What if you have intellectual property, patents, trademarks, domains, phone numbers? These are all assets that you can lose. So people always have a lot more than they think they do. But once we've educated and once we've inventoried their wealth, to me, the next step is really just become their architect. So I tell people, if you want to build your dream house, you don't start building. First thing you do is you hire an architect. So we become their financial architect, and we literally show them anything and everything they can do. Again, knowing they're not going to do everything, we show them everything. We separate it by personal and business. We prioritize it of what you should have done 10 years ago. What are more bells and whistles? And then once you've educated yourself, once you've once you've inventoried your wealth, and once you have all your what I'd call financial architectural plans and blueprints, then you can decide what you want to do.
Okay, great. So it sounds like very comprehensive services that you offer. Is there a difference between like asset protection versus trust versus an estate planner? You know, there's a lot of different options when you're looking at your wealth and your estate. So, you know, what is this team of experts that someone needs to assemble?
Sure. So I'll give you a long list. Understand that somebody could certainly wear more than one hats. And I'm not going in any order. You have estate planning. They deal with what happens when you die. You have asset protection, protect what you have while you're alive. You have financial advisor, you have CPAs, you have tax attorneys, you have business succession planning specialists. So it goes on and on. But biggest misconceptions are probably the estate planning and the asset protection. There's
Mhm.
hundreds of estate planning attorneys in every city. There's very few asset protection attorneys in the country. They're two very different things. So just make sure if you want estate planning, go to an estate planning attorney. If you want asset protection, go to an asset protection attorney, but they're two totally separate things.
Very interesting. Okay. What are the reasons to develop a trust versus a family limited partnership?
Sure. So the trust we talked about, there's two types of trusts. There's the revocable trust, which helps you avoid probate for estate planning. And then there's irrevocable trust, which gives you asset protection, tax planning, gets it outside of your taxable estate, but it's irrevocable. And then a limited partnership is more of a asset protection tool. You can use it for estate planning in the sense that you can give away assets without losing control. So it's kind of like when do you use a screwdriver, when do you use a wrench? They're all really good.
Right.
Uh, I'd use a revocable trust if I'm trying to avoid probate. I'd use a limited partnership if I wanted to protect my assets and potentially gift without losing control. And I'd use an irrevocable trust for asset protection and tax planning if I'm okay with losing control.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing the difference between those. Can you talk more about equity stripping and that as a tactic?
Sure. So, like we talked about, equity stripping is making an asset valueless. It's putting liens and mortgages and encumbrances on different assets. I don't know the specific question, so I'll just talk in general a little bit.
Mhm.
One good way to use it is if you have a piece of property, maybe you have a property that's worth 2 million bucks. Well, you could probably go get a line of credit from the bank for 1,500,000. They automatically record it as a mortgage of 1,500,000 that day. So if somebody goes to look you up, it's going to show that you have a $2 million property, but 1,500,000 is pledged to the bank. Now, it may not even cost you anything, maybe a small yearly fee, because if you don't pull that 1,500,000, you're not paying any interest because you didn't pull it. So
Okay.
lines of credit are really good for equity stripping as well. And then if you want to pull it, you could pull the money, invest it, and maybe if you're paying 5% on the line, obviously that would be low today. But if you're paying 5% on the line and you can invest it at 10%, now you've equity stripped and you can leverage the money to double it. So again, a lot that goes into everything, but just talking in general.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about the fact that because I was going to ask what the rising interest rates, although they've been held the last couple cycles, rising interest rates due to the viability of equity stripping. But your point is that it's the line of credit. You're not necessarily leveraging it. You just have the line of credit.
Correct.
Okay. So then you're not really at risk. Now, if there is a higher interest rate, are they looking at the lifetime value of the loan? So is there almost an advantage to higher interest rates and getting that line of credit at a
I
higher
don't,
interest rate?
I don't know that there's an advantage to it, but normally these lines are year to year, so they're going to change
Okay.
drastically anyways.
Okay, excellent. Well, a lot to think about. One last question. Is there anything that someone should do in the next, 16 days before the end of the year to protect themselves, whether it's for taxes, some advantages that they might have on something they should do before December 31st?
Sure. So honestly, look, you don't want to rush things and you want to do a quality job, not a quick job. So I wouldn't tell someone to go try and rush and do something within 2 weeks. What I would
Okay.
say is make it a New Year's resolution to educate yourself. Read my books. I'll send them to you at no charge. My mission is to educate. So just email me. I'll send you complimentary copies of the books. There's no catch. We don't charge for shipping or anything like that. But just educate yourself. Know that there's things that are out there that can help you, and then plan, accordingly. But don't try and rush it, and do it the right way. I'm just a firm believer of doing things right the first time. That way, you never need to do it again. And then anything you do, you can literally pass down from generation to generation.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's a great call to action. Have a New Year's resolution to get educated. And thank you for sharing your insights today and the offer for your books as well for people to start their education process. So thanks so much, Hillel.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. I hope today was educational, timely, and valuable. And I'll leave you kind of with two things. One being own nothing, control everything. If you own it, you can lose it. And number two is for every 60 minutes you spend making money, stop, spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it. Everybody have a great weekend and a very happy holiday season.
Thank you so much. And for our attendees, we'll be sending a link to today's recording as well as the slides within 24 hours. And just want to remind you of some of our upcoming webinars in the new year. We've got a series of things designed to help you start the year off with some great insights. So first, our Vistage speaker and strategic planning expert, Mark Emmer, comes to us on Friday, January 12th. He'll be recapping his popular series from the Vistage Research Center, Business Trends for 2024 and Beyond, looking at economic, social, technological, and ecological trends that you should be thinking about. Then the following week on January 18th, ITR Economics, our trusted partner, is coming back for a Vistage exclusive, where Brian Bullia will dive into upcoming changes they anticipate in the business cycle for both 2024 and 2025, helping you plan for the short and long term. And then on February 2nd, Vistage Chief Research Officer Joe Galvin will share the key findings of our Q4 Vistage CEO Confidence Index Survey, which is in the field right now through end of day Monday. And that will highlight the key challenges and opportunities that CEOs across Vistage see for the new year. And finally, mark your calendar for March 1st, when we host our next member exclusive streaming event with best-selling author Marcus Buckingham. Marcus will talk about his insights on putting love back into work, making you and your employees more engaged. So you can register for these sessions now at vistage.com/webinar. That's vistage.com/webinar. So be safe, be well, and happy holidays.